Now I'm gonna highlight your. Are you opening up, Ellie? So should I? Yeah, that's perfect.
So I should be screen sharing, and I'm going to do slideshow and just do the
And do
usual
a source normally then.
double check that the slides are moving as I go. Does that slide move?
Yeah.
Yep, that's great. Well, thanks for that lovely introduction for myself and Jenefer, and thanks for sharing a bit about Scarlett. And it was really lovely to see a couple of little ones pop up on the screens and disappear again. So thank you for having us. As I say, we're from Great Ormond Street. We're from a specialist service looking at development and developmental concerns or questions for children with visual impairments. What I'll probably just do is a little bit of housekeeping, that it's not really a forum where we can be giving medical advice about your children, but more signpost our experience in assessing children, understanding children's differences, and where if you find there are blocks on the way to understanding what your child needs, where we might be looking for extra support and how we fit in with your local services. So I hope that's going to be useful. I'll go at a slow pace so we've got time to digest, and I'll try and read everything out that's on the slide, and I'm glad you're going to be getting them. There's no patient identifiable info on them, so that's fine. And I wonder if, Jenefer, as I'm going, please just chip in if you think there's an important message we need to reiterate, or if you think there's a question that comes in the chat that's worth answering as we go. I'm very happy to do that. So feel free just to write anything. There's no such thing as a stupid or wrong question. If there's anything you want to share, please just go ahead as we go. So the key points we're hoping to cover are really, what do we understand when we talk about autism and an autistic way of developing? What is this complex interplay between understanding what could be autistic profiles of development or a child with visual impairment, but who's following a more neurotypical profile of development for a child learning without the use of their vision? How those things interplay and what we understand about that, and how we could practically try and seek further advice and understanding for questions about your own children. And then we'll go to questions. So when we talk about autism, what we really talk about is an important neurodevelopmental difference, and it's a difference that causes impairment if we don't properly support and understand it. We live in a world now where it's correct and right to acknowledge the different experience and how it's inherent in many of us to be developing this way, but it's strikingly different to the majority of people they're interacting with. So we need to understand this different communication style and behavioral style to make sure these people who are autistic people can thrive. So the key features that we see and contribute towards a diagnosis is really understanding, is there an important difference in what we call social communication, and that's both in the verbal and non-verbal communication overtures or styles, the ways we initiate and interact with people. Plus, the other side of this profile is people who are more prone to having a more rigid or specific or concrete way of approaching routines in life, approaching problems to be solved, and also having a tendency to prefer to do things in the similar way over and over that could be interpreted as a repetitive behavior. Really important slide, and I'll just take a minute to have a look at this, that really when we talk about autism and we talk about autism spectrum conditions, we really have come away from thinking about people as being more or less autistic, because it really doesn't define what they need to thrive, and it's just not true. And it's not as respectful of the autistic experience as different people find it, people with intellectual disability or not, people who are verbal communicators or not. It's very hard to tease apart whether they are themselves more or less autistic than someone else. What we need to do is look at an individual and more treat it as an approach looking at each area of development and area of participation that they need support with. So social differences, interests, sensory experiences, emotional regulation, to name but a few. So we've tried to move away from terms like high functioning, low functioning. Some people still self-describe themselves as Asperger's or Asperger's type, ASPE, and who are we to say what someone should define themselves as? But in the medical approach, we won't be doing that. There's some of what we call the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. That's the thing we use in medicine, primarily based from the States. There's another system that's also used by us and in Europe and throughout the world. But it's the system we use to make a medical diagnosis if there's a condition which relies on a cluster of behavioural symptoms, behavioural signs, and there's no one test, as it were. And that manual does stratify levels of need. But even so, we don't really tend to use that language in day-to-day life, because who are we to say those levels of need won't change if we support them well enough? So when we think about children who are sighted and young people who are sighted, what sort of things might we come across to make us think, could this be an autistic way of developing? Is there something about development that needs support or understanding? So some examples here, and it's from a leaflet from the National Institute of Clinical Excellence that is given to children and young people who are able to read if they're about to be undergoing an assessment that's available to anyone should they need it. Just some of the things people might notice about themselves. So they might find it difficult to talk or play with other children and young people, talk with them, share a conversation. Their interests might not match the rest of their peer group or their interests might be very intense and very passionate about those interests to the extent that it's excluding interest in other things sometimes. There might be undue stress and anxiety for certain experiences, social experiences, or experiences which involve a lot of sensory stimulus, and that could be very hard and make it difficult to cope with. And then touching again on a different sensory experience, where some sensory experiences are very interesting and all-consuming, and some are very unpleasant that for other people they may be able to take in their stride. So noise, touch, taste, texture. A strong preference for a usual routine, and then we're thinking there about, is it a usual routine that gets you through the day, like we use when we're teaching children about what's expected of them in their school day, in their day at home, or is it a routine that is hard to make sense of as well, that it just has to be done that way, otherwise it just doesn't feel right for that person. It's hard to explain to someone else why it must be done that way, and if we don't follow that routine, does it cause significant disruption to daily life? And then sometimes we notice that some parts of development are really cracking on really well and some just aren't progressing. So they might be very physically able, going up the climbing frame, but not quite matching that in terms of their language skills or how their skills are progressing at school in the academics. I can see one question in the chat. I'm just going to check, is there anything we need to be addressing, or I'm just going to have a little look. Oh, no, it's just Charlotte.
No, it's just send a question if you've got one. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So in any service, in any approach to understanding if there's an autistic profile of development, so that could be a child with no other known developmental concerns, a child with a hearing impairment, a visual impairment, a movement difference, a learning difference, we really need to understand the whole profile of communication and the whole profile of behaviour. And we need to understand, is this a different style occurring across a number of situations? It doesn't have to look the same in different situations. No child behaves for their mum and dad the way they would behave for their teacher or in the playground. But is there evidence that there's something different going on that needs an understanding and support across these different areas? And is that level of support and that level of difference, is it over and above or noticeably different to the rest of the child's profile? And that's where we think about visual impairment, because, and also depending on the child's language skills, that's and where they're at with their cognitive skills, and where they're at with their social and emotional health in terms of anything else there that might be driving a behaviour that's hard to understand. Oh, the slide's frozen, bear with me. There we go. So what I'm just showing you here is some of the equipment from what is the more standardized approach we use for part of the assessment, part of that information gathering. So this is all the kit we have for when we're doing a very play-based, direct observational assessment. It might be something you've experienced with your own children or you know about from other people. The acronym is ADOS. That stands for Autism Diagnosis Observation Schedule. And we have different modules of this that we use depending on a child's language level and also whether they're going into adolescence, because some of the themes that come out would be more relevant for that child's experience or young person's experience. So as you can see, the stuff on the table here is for the what we call the module 1. So it's preschool to reception age and children who are and then there's children who aren't yet developing phrase speech, and all that material is incredibly visual. So these standardized measures are not suitable for children with severe visual impairment. We rely on being able to describe a picture together, noticing what the examiner or what the parent who's in the room is doing with their gaze. So the scoring just isn't relevant. But sometimes what we can do through play with a child, regardless of what their level of vision is, through play with the child, through understanding, through a good conversation with parents, a good interview, a good liaison with school. You don't always need to go to become nervous or apprehensive that we've not been able to do this standardized assessment, because the evidence could be there that we've got important differences that are impairing if they're not understood, that meet the criteria for an autistic profile of development, and that aren't best explained by the rest of the child's profile. So sometimes there is sufficient evidence from play-based observations, school, etc., to support an additional diagnosis. But what do we do when there's not? And how do we tease apart these differences? So what we do know about visual impairment and autism is children learning with low vision or no vision, they may learn more slowly and show differences in right across the board of development. And that includes in social communication, in their play interests and skills, and in their interaction with other people. Some of these might be similar to those seen in fully sighted children with autism, but they might not all be children with vision impairment who go on to be understood as being autistic. So it's really challenging sometimes to think about these early signs and are they normal for VI, whatever normal is. So what we don't want, even if we're in the process of understanding what might be an early clue, what might be an early sign, even if we're in a process of trying to really get that good research evidence for where are these children we should be bringing up and supporting and getting early, thinking about diagnosis that bit earlier. We don't want to miss opportunities to provide targeted help, and to make targets, we need to understand where the impairment lies, or what's not going right for this child, for this little one. So we don't want to misdiagnose them as being just themselves, just what we'd expect of a child with their condition, a child with their eye difference or brain difference, and miss the chance to get the support in to build those joint attention skills, to build their enjoyment and participation and function. So what we do know about autism and visual impairment is that there are some young children with severe VI, and by that I mean having light perception or no light perception, where there's a certain proportion where development begins and progresses as we'd hope, and then around 12 to 18 months that can slow, and sometimes the interest in play materials for learning, the interest in exploring through play, actually takes a step back. And these are the children who previous work looking at early intervention, we've really tried to target, can we change this trajectory? Can we improve the experience of these children? And that's where things that have come about, such as the Vision Journal, which we'll talk about in a moment, that was really one of the main aims, was can we bring these children, bring them along on their developmental journey to a different outcome. And we do know that autism is commoner in children with severe visual impairment compared to children with full vision. There's 2 questions there. Just have a little bit.
Yeah, I'm taking a note Lovely. Of the questions. Amazing. So I'll kind of accumulate those if that's okay.
Yeah, brilliant.
Thanks, Jennifer. I appreciate that.
Do a little time check. Yeah, we're doing well. So some things we don't know. Some things we don't know. What's the thing that might help to promote a wider variety of skills to need less support as you get older? But what we do know is limited vision is going to affect the way you do your social interaction, the way you participate in joint attention, regardless of whether you've got this different developing style or not, regardless of whether you're coming out the other end of it, being someone with more neurotypical skills when it comes to a back and forth exchange, being able to put yourself in another person's situation, having insight into another person's experience. That's going to be different when you're learning with low vision or no vision. You're not going to be referencing someone else's eye contact. You're not going to be looking at what they're looking at. You're not going to be looking at what other people's reaction is to what you're doing and build a picture of what's socially understood of your behavior. The way you tune into joint attention relies a lot more heavily on other people actively approaching you to give you that information for joint attention. There is very little incidental information to work out, oh, this is a shared opportunity. This is something I can share my experience with someone else. It's not happening in that incidental way that it might be for a little one in playgroup who's noticing what the other children are doing and has a go themselves, or what their parents doing and has a go themselves, unless we get that active entry into the little one's world. Facial expression and emotion is not part of the way you're going to learn about your inner state and how it might be evidenced on others, and how your inner state is going to be shown to others, and what's happening with someone else's inner state in their emotions. You're going to rely on different ways, narration, and that's going to be coming later with language. So that's very hard to get that early understanding of emotional regulation. And as we said, looking at what others are looking at, so implying what they're thinking. And modeling your actions on others. And then that really fundamental thing, the ways you understand that you can do the same thing as other people, it's not going to be incidental. It's going to require some extra input. So really, we should really think about, if you're learning with low or no vision, if you're developing your social communication repertoire, it's going to be different, and it's going to be vulnerable if it's not supported. And we also don't know the additional factors that are to do with the actual condition that's resulted in vision impairment itself. We do know even in conditions that we might think of as just eye differences, we know some of these conditions, the genetics of how they're expressed, that might have resulted in someone with a small eye, or an eye that's not working as we'd expect, or a retinal difference, or a iris difference. We know those genes aren't only expressed in the eye, they can be expressed throughout the central nervous system. That could have an effect on how your brain's generally connected. And we know that when there are what we call neurodevelopmental, just very global differences in a brain, we know you're more likely to have autism. And that's just one example. So the underlying condition is going to have an impact too. So it's important we think about that when we're formulating as well. And what we don't know is, are there ways of bringing up or changing the path for these children who might have early differences to change the outcome? And that's a bit of a hot topic in itself, because it's really, we need to think, should we be aiming to change someone who that's their profile of development? What's the goal there? That's a really sort of current theme when we think about neurodiversity and accepting people's communication profiles for what they are. But we also need to think about, if someone's struggling to be shown new learning materials and participate, that's going to be impairing in itself. So how do we get early joint attention going? So it's evidence-based, and it's the developmental journal came about from looking at it was a funded research project looking at what are the things that we can improve, and it's getting an intervention early. It's having a set of shared goals to work through for a parent to have some structured ideas of next steps across development, and social communication is included within that, and joint attention. So getting in early, trying to add in to that lack of shared visual information by adding in shared tactile information, shared vocalization, to really mitigate for that loss, that not having the incidental information that you might get from having sight, and lots of careful labeling of a shared experience using voice. So is it VI or is it autism? Coming back to Charlotte's thoughts about Scarlett all those years ago. So in the past, there was quite a lot of behaviour and quite a lot of language skill building that might have been seen as just typical for VI, typical for visual impairment. We know that you're going to be developing your language skills that little bit later. And you might be more prone to relying on chunks of information rather than labeling objects first, labeling nouns, labeling the things around you in your daily life. You might tune into hearing a phrase that's used and pick up on that and play with it and use it. And if that really persists, we've got an understanding that and it doesn't really fade away. There is an understanding, not 100% evidence-based, but a real understanding that you might be a bit more prone to being someone who's got an autistic profile of development. Differences in developing your play interests. It might look like a little one is being a bit restricted or a bit repetitive, where in fact, if we think about you're not being shown the other play opportunities around you and you've had a good play experience, you might want to just keep repeating that and not stop. But where does that line cross into being a barrier to being shown new things and need to be understood as possibly more an autistic profile of development? So those are the little nuances we try and pick apart. And it's very hard for one person to do that on their own. And I'm not implying a parent should be picking that apart, but it's more, these are the things we need to look at together to think, where's this going? Where's the barrier to moving forward? So how we do diagnosis when we need to think about diagnosis, who and when. So you're right, it can be very dependent on the experience and skill mix of a local team, and it can be very dependent on specialist knowledge, and there can be a lot of hesitancy to have an opinion about the development of a child with visual impairment, because severe visual impairment overall isn't a very, very common condition in childhood. So there may be a lot of developmental pediatricians or community-based services or educationalists who don't have a big background knowledge of lots of different children with vision impairment. So that's kind of understandable. But if we work together, we can start to fit things together and really think and gather that information from across the board. So when we work together, it's a lot more helpful, and we're really interested in trying to empower local teams if they're feeling confident and that they've got sufficient evidence to really think this little one, this young person is following an autistic profile of development, to reach those conclusions, that we're going to be gathering information from the same places, but just with a bit more depth of understanding about what a neurotypical or an autistic way of developing with VI is. And sometimes the evidence is there, you just need the confidence to really understand it. But we can be there, and we are there if the local team thinks this other perspective is helpful. So for older children with vision impairment, the reaching the conclusion can be a bit more straightforward, because there's less of that uncertainty about, is this just development, early development? Is this behaviour just something that we might expect a bit of repetitive behaviour while we're trying out something and realising it's fun and doing it again and again before moving on to the next toy? Is it somebody who's learnt their language by chunks, but then gets going and is more flexible with their language and can have a back and forth exchange? And so it gets a little bit easier often as a child grows up. But really, you do still have to put what's happening in the context of a child's overall cognitive skills. So that side of the development, which sometimes we don't always need to come in with our clinical psychologists and do lots of adapted measures, but a local educational psychologist liaising with a visual impairment teacher may be able to reach some useful conclusions about that. And why do we do it? Well, it's important to acknowledge, so that I think in the world of scarcity of resources and funding concerns, we cannot presume that specific packages of speech and language therapy to promote joint attention or promote participation on a child's terms with their abilities, specific mental health support and interventions, access to peer support, access to understanding about yourself as you get older. These are all really important reasons. So to do that, we have to think, what are the specific differences that are causing concern? So if you're thinking about autism, if you're wondering, having really sort of concrete, real world examples of a time when joint attention has proven tricky, a time when it's resulted in something not going well for your little one, of a time when language has struck you that you've not understood why they've chosen to use their language that way, or why they're repeating. Little examples of phrases are always really, really helpful, just to really build that real world picture of what's happening in daily life. So what are the difficulties, and what is the specific support this person has got a right to access? So we've sort of whizzed through a lot there, and you might have noticed I've stayed away from very specifics about how to refer to us, because really the question is, if these questions can't be answered by working together with your developmental support in your local area from paediatrics, if you have it, we're very aware not everybody does or needs it at this stage on the journey through childhood, with your team in education, as a parent, with your understanding of what's going on. If you feel there's a barrier to understanding what's going on, we are very happy to be there. We are very happy to be referred to. And I think I'll probably just leave it there for now. So thanks so much. It was quite a whirlwind there in the end, actually. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your questions as we've gone along. And also, it's really important to remember that, Jenefer and I never ever work alone. And it's one of the reasons I really love my job, is I'm very rarely the only person who's trying to solve a problem or think about a question. We're a lovely team of clinical psychologists, speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, and developmental doctors. And we're working closely with our iClinic colleagues as well, and talking to visual impairment teachers. So thanks for that. And I'll just pause here.
That was great. Thank you.
Can I chip in with a couple of thoughts before we go into questions? As Ellie said, we no longer distinguish higher functioning and lower functioning in anything. That's not really a helpful way forward. But as Ellie also said, it's really, really helpful to understand where a child's learning is. And it is much easier to distinguish differences that really might truly be reflections of what we summarize as an autism spectrum condition from visual impairment, when a child has more robust intellectual skills, if I can put it like that, where it's much more difficult. And we actually end up talking with parents along the lines of, how is a diagnosis going to help? What's the best way forward? It's much, much more difficult to distinguish areas of difference from autism when there is significant intellectual disability, and those are where we might find that we are in a situation that we might call a diagnostic dilemma. And we're very much aware that a diagnostic label is not something that all parents want or seek, and yet the flip side of a diagnosis can sometimes be that it unlocks resources and services. But we don't ever feel that a child is ever the label at the top of their letter. It's what comes underneath, because, as I'm sure many of you may have heard other people say, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, and you could have 100 people with autism in the same room, and they would all be different. And the same might go for children with visual impairment. So it's much more difficult to distinguish those difficulties when there is a mix of slower learning difficulties, intellectual disability. It can still be done, but it's much, much easier to think about what is normal for visual impairment and what might be a sign of additional weakness in communication sufficient to lead to that kind of diagnostic conclusion. And having worked in the developmental service for a few years now, I can look back and think, you know, as a team, we've gone through different phases. We've gone through phases where we really felt it wasn't possible to make a diagnosis, an additional diagnosis of autism in a very young child, because we really weren't sure whether those difficulties were going to be temporary or permanent. But we do now feel that there are some situations where it is possible to give that additional diagnosis early on. One question that often comes up is, you know, will you ever get better from whatever it is the doctor has told you you've got? And because autism is a developmental condition, nothing is ever set in stone. Children don't stay how you describe them today. They're going to be different next week. They're going to be different next year. And a lot has been written about whether autism and visual impairment might be what's called a reversible condition. And in a way, that's not surprising, is it? Because a person with autism who doesn't have visual impairment doesn't show the same strengths and differences over time. So, you know, any child, any young person, any adult, you know, we're dynamic beings. We grow and change over time. And there has been some published research that actually talks about people with visual impairment having fewer difficulties related to their so-called autism spectrum condition. So a diagnosis shouldn't be seen as, you know, a box, an imprisonment. It's something that might help describe how a child is now. So what I was saying was we used to be a bit more reluctant to diagnose autism in very young children. I think we've got a little bit more confident about that now. But the trickiest age group is probably still children who are in that kind of late preschool, early school years. And that is where some of our colleagues have been, well, they've completed a research study to look at whether we can use an adapted form of the assessment that Ellie showed. So if you go back to what that slide showed, it had lots of toys, it had books, it had pictures. One of the questions was, what level of severe visual impairment means that you can't use the ADOS? Well, any level of vision where a child actually can't see a picture, can't see the detail in the picture, you're not going to be able to use that test, because it's not fair to judge a child on materials that they can't properly see. So the adapted version of the ADOS that we hope will come into use is going to be something that doesn't contain materials that a child with visual impairment can't see, because that's not really a fair test, and it's going to have some other activities that would help us draw out those areas of difference. I'll just say one other thing. I think there's a question about, are severe visual impairment and autism linked? Again, this is something we used to think about and puzzle over a lot in the past, whether the autism followed the visual impairment or whether there could be signs from very early on that a child was showing differences. And I think the answer is we probably don't know. The little graph that Ellie showed, where there was a slope going upwards representing normal development, there was a slope that leveled off, and then there was another slope that went downwards, children who seemed to regress and lose skills. I think in those very early stages of development, there might still be things that are problematic for the child that we still don't know how to measure. So from a theoretical, slightly academic point of view, there may still be things that we don't know, but we certainly know from lots of research studies that the likelihood of growing into an autistic profile is many times commoner in children with severe visual impairment than it is in children with normal vision. Having said that, there are also other conditions that are associated with a higher risk of autism, and that's a reflection of the fact that there are lots of different things that might contribute to the development of autism, differences in brain structures, differences in genes, being born too early, and so on. So there's lots and lots of different things that feed into that.
Thanks, Jenefer. I'm really glad you brought up the adapted measure, and that it's so our research colleagues who work in the clinic as well, it's just about to go through for publication, and it's a measure that we're using in what we'd call a qualitative way at the moment now anyway, to gather that information. I'm just looking through the questions if there's anything else that's something we can help with. I hope that addresses your question, Daniela, about how we decide who should be accessing, what tools we should try to use to elicit someone's communication style and understand if it's autistic. Philip shared his experience with Teddy. Thank you.
Hang on, I'm just going with some more questions here. Yep, okay. Yes, so Philip said genetic testing was really helpful. There is so much more genetic testing available now than there was even 5 years ago. It's fairly mainstream, and that can just give you an extra piece of information. So we agree that that's very helpful.
Yeah. What I would say, though, at the moment is what they do is they do parts of genome sequencing based on what a child's development looks like, and they put in information to decide which parts to do. And at the moment, using the definition autism, there isn't a reliable panel that they've developed yet. So what they'll put in is information about a child's eye difference or brain difference, or if they've got intellectual disability, and use that to decide. There isn't a reliable gene panel that's going to elicit diagnostic genetic information if we just consider just autism, but they're looking at that all the time.
I see we've got some more questions. There was one other thing actually I just wanted to highlight. If you think Ellie very early on in the presentation talked about 2 areas of difference that go together to move us towards thinking about autism, or what's sometimes called an autism spectrum condition. And until I can't remember when it came in, we used to talk about a triad of impairments, and now we just talk about 2 areas. But one thing to really bring out in the section that's called rigid and repetitive behaviours is the differences in the way that children might respond to sensory experiences. So you might have a child who dislikes certain noise or likes certain noise, or is oversensitive to smell, or is a child who likes touching things or licking things. So that's a really, really important aspect of what contributes to an autism spectrum condition. And of course, these are differences that many of you and ourselves will see in children with visual impairment. And this is one of the areas where sometimes people think, well, it's just the visual impairment. And we know parents who have found discussions with their specialist teachers a little bit challenging at times, because the teacher might be just seeing it as visual impairment and not really fully listening to how challenging some of those scenarios can be. But the other thing that comes into play, and we do see this quite a lot, is that some children who have quite striking differences in those ways that they react to sensory experiences sometimes get diagnosed with what is sometimes called a sensory processing disorder. I don't know whether any of you have come across that term. And that is something that will often come from seeing an occupational therapist. And there is a sort of line of thought that talks about sensory integration therapy. And there are some questionnaire tools that can determine whether a child is a sensory seeker or a sensory avoider. And some professionals will go so far as to make a diagnosis of a sensory processing disorder. Now, we fully know that sensory differences can be really, really challenging, and they're very, very real experiences for children and families. But strictly speaking, if you think that Ellie mentioned something called the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5, and the equivalent in this country is the ICD-10, International Classification of Disease. So these very kind of technical things. but sensory processing disorder isn't actually formally recognised as a diagnosis. Does that matter? I mean, from a technical point of view, we try and stick to those recognised classification systems, but that's not to say that we diminish the importance of those sensory differences. But to come back to where I started with this, those sensory differences can be an integral part of what clusters together to make an autism spectrum condition. Does that make sense? Yeah. So sometimes we're asked to see children and the child is described as having a sensory processing disorder, but we might go a little bit on from that and look at those sensory differences along with everything else, and then it becomes part and parcel of it. It's not something separate, it's all part of the same thing. Is there anything you want to add to that, Ellie?
No, I don't think so. And it's about, what I would say is we always look for respectful of everyone's experience of having a difference in how they're processing the sensory side of things, but also acknowledging if there isn't a really clear, robust base of evidence that interventions are going to be helpful, that's where I would be concerned about following that and not looking at the whole picture for this child. Because with things like being given a sensory diet, or you might have heard those sort of terms, interventions based at building tolerability of a certain sensation, I'd always think, what's the outcome of this? How is, what are we aiming for? What are we aiming to improve about this child's experience? What's the evidence we're going to get there? Can we do something else to make that experience more bearable for them within the profile they've got? Make it more enjoyable. Yeah.
Shall we go through some of the other questions?
Yeah.
So somebody called Jen, that's a great name. How can we contact you if we need support with our local team? So we are very often contacted by specialist teachers. We welcome contact from specialist teachers. So you can certainly, although I don't know whether you're needing support from your local team or with your local team. As Ellie said earlier, working out how to get a diagnosis is not too difficult, but unfortunately we can't accept referrals from specialist teachers, and that's just because as a health service we have to have a health-based referral. So Ellie or myself couldn't make a referral to an educational psychologist, for example. The school would need to do that. It has to be a health-based referral, but it can't be a GP referral because a GP is a primary provider and we're a tertiary specialist. If there's a really good reason for ourselves as a specialist team to see your child, then an ophthalmologist can refer, a paediatrician can refer. But it's really important to help figure out whether it's really important for our team to see your child. We do see children from across the country, but we can't see everybody. But a first step might be talking to your specialist teacher, talking to your paediatrician, and setting out why you think a specialist assessment might be really helpful at this stage. So I hope that's helpful. Jen, do you want to say anything else about that?
Thank you so much. I so appreciate that.
Okay.
So, sorry, if I understand correctly, then I go to my QTVI and talk to her about that maybe we would need to be approaching together the paediatrician, and see if there's any support that the paediatrician might need. We've got a multidisciplinary approach at the moment, but it is very vague, and this might just support, but it needs to come from my QTVI and the paediatrician, and then they would refer to you. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Great.
I mean, in a way, we'd love to be able to take referrals from teachers, because it's almost like we're saying the teacher has to go through an extra layer, but it's just the way the commissioning and the funding works.
Thank you so much.
So it's a question from Victoria. Your son's 17, he has been discharged. Yes, you can request his notes. It's not just a question of getting in touch with us and then we'll facilitate that. So now how does this work, Ellie?
Is it through PALS? Is it
Is it through
PALS?
PALS? If you contact PALS, the Patient Advocacy and Liaison Service, they will
I'll just put
certainly
them in the chat.
direct you to the correct department. It's not the case that you can just be given a copy, but it is the case that you can be supported to view that. Certainly. Right, somebody else chipping in there. No. Certainly, any outpatient letters that you should have been sent can be provided with you. But if you're looking for more than that, then there is a process to be gone through. So contact the PALS department. And if you look on the GOSH website, the PALS team contacts should be in there.
Oh, yeah, we've got your link there, Ellie.
I've just popped it in the chat.
Fabulous. I will also, when I do a follow-up email after the session, I'll include that in the email as well, just in case someone's not managed to grab it. So we're on to Philip now.
My son is 8. He is above average language and speech, but still at a loss as to truly understanding what's limiting his progress. Is it VI or his autism? What test or diagnostic tools are available to older children, as you just referred to this? Thanks. So I'm just reading this, and am I understanding that, Philip, your son's understood to be autistic already and has a diagnosis, or is it that you're thinking about autism? Because those would be two different questions, probably. If your son is understood to have visual impairment and autism, so are you there? Fantastic. If you felt able to tell us, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, he's already got the diagnosis of both of them.
Yeah. Again, but with the caveat that I can't really be providing direct medical advice, more what I would look for in terms of next steps to help support your son is, have you got the specialist team for autism from the SEN team at school involved and linking in with your VI teacher to understand where the barriers are? Often a bit of joint working. Every local authority usually has a group of sort of SEN experts in autism who will come in and look at what adaptations are being made, what's being done to reduce barriers to participation and progress, and whether there's a bit of an understanding about learning level as well, and whether it's worth, I mean, as you say, he's got above average speech language, but looking at what progress might mean for your little one and how we're defining progress. So a bit of joint working with the SEN autism team and the VI might be helpful.
Yeah, we've got the VI team are working with him, but I don't feel there is any integration with the autism team at all. There isn't any. So
yeah,
that's not an uncommon scenario. I think some visual impairment teachers have a slightly sort of narrower definition of their role and just think, well, my role is the vision and adaptation of materials and so on. And indeed, some of that might reflect lack of experience in that teacher. But I think one thing we know about children who have autism is that they can have quite different learning styles. They can be really, really good at aspects of learning by memory, but they can find other aspects of learning where you've got to make inference and deduction more difficult. So just reading your question, it just makes me wonder, Philip, whether there's a little bit more to be understood about how he learns. I don't know how long it might be since he had an assessment by an educational psychologist. Has he had one of those, or did that happen quite early on?
We got that done in 2019. No, he was diagnosed in 2020 with Alstrom, and we got the Ed Psych report the year before that or a year after that. I can't remember. It was fairly recent.
Yeah, so that's quite a few years ago, isn't it? That's a good 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So I'd be wondering about what is his learning style. So it's really great to hear that he's got strong language skills, but there again, there can also be some areas of difference underneath those strengths. And so we always do a person a disservice if we think that everything is as good as the best thing, and we do somebody a disservice if we think the converse, that everything is as weak as the weakest thing. And children are sometimes a bit spiky, you know, we're not all round and smooth like a potato. We've got lots of different bits that stick out. And so I wonder whether that may be part of it, and seeing if somebody could look at his learning again might be a helpful thing. So he might be showing some good skills, but there might be some areas of struggle underneath that it might be helpful to understand in a bit more detail. And
what can your specific team at Gosh then do? Do I get my paediatrician to refer to you and say, so I think he needs an updated ed site report, or do you need more intervention?
Well, what we would do, were we to receive a referral, will probably be to look at his learning profile. So it's really a cognitive assessment of his verbal areas of learning and his non-verbal areas of learning. I can't remember, Philip, if you mentioned what level of visual impairment your son has.
Dr. Henderson at Gosh categorised him as severe.
Okay, so does he have any useful vision? Because severe is quite a wide category.
Yeah, so got functional. It can recognise stuff, can navigate around, and can see up close.
Yeah, okay. Well, a cognitive assessment might be helpful in just trying to tease apart, as you say, you know, what's holding him back? Is it the things that add up to autism, or is it the things about the visual impairment? So it might well be helpful to seek that type of assessment at this stage. So it would be really a cognitive assessment.
And that could come through educational psychology, or we have that in our clinic as well.
And indeed, the next person, Nelson, has said, you know, your child is under Gosh, could he be referred to our team? Yes, we do take internal referrals. I hope what you've heard from us is that we like to work as a team, as Ellie said, but we like to work very much with you as parents and also with whoever is supporting your child. So one thing we always do is, except when the post doesn't deliver it, is send you a questionnaire saying, well, what are your main concerns? What are the questions you want to know? Because unless we're answering your concerns, we're not really doing anything very useful. And the same goes for who is working with your child. And it's not uncommon for us to be in a situation where a parent has got a very, very strong and clear question. I'm worried my child might be autistic. And the teacher is saying, well, I don't think this is autism because this is just visual impairment. So we will try and hold both of those questions and answer those questions as best we can. So yes, we can take an internal referral, but we find it extremely helpful to know who is involved locally, to be seeing reports from your VI teacher, your community paediatrician, because all that information is relevant to you and your child. And it's not that we're going to be influenced by seeing what somebody else has written, but that all just adds up to a big whole. Sometimes we just get one-line referrals because that's all the ophthalmologist can write. You know, as somebody said to me, I'm an ophthalmologist, I only speak in phrases, but we do like to have that information because that's really critical and useful information about your child. So we do often go back to the local team, and sometimes we might need to check who's involved. So I hope that answers that question.
Thank you very much.
Shall we go on to Emma's question?
Yeah, okay. My child is 6 with albinism.
Yeah,
and
albinism, and the nystagmus will obviously come from the albinism. So again, Emma, this sounds like a very similar question in a way to Philip, but Philip's son has a diagnosis of autism, and that's a very real question. You know, what comes from where? And sometimes an assessment that looks at what makes up the autism, where the visual impairment is impacting, can really, really help that. And that's one of the things that we can do. But again, some local teams would feel able to do that. Now, I don't know what level of vision your child has, Emma, but often children with albinism may have slightly better levels of visual acuity, may have a moderate visual impairment. And sometimes a deciding issue for a local team is, can I use the materials for assessment that I would normally use? Or are those materials not going to work for this child? So sometimes we do get referrals, and we can see that actually the child has enough vision for those usual materials to be usable, and we might not see that child, because we want, as Ellie's already said, to really help some local teams feel we can do this. What we don't want is for people to be going, oh, visual impairment, I don't know anything, I can't do anything, when actually teams are, local teams are very experienced in autism. They want to feel they're not thrown off the scent, if you like, by the visual impairment. So it sounds like a more detailed assessment might be helpful, Emma. It may be that your local team can do that if your child has a reasonable level of vision.
Thank you.
And then I can see Sarah's question about being Birmingham based. We absolutely take referrals from across the country. So the answer is yes, we would consider a referral. As always, it's helpful to know what the question is, what's understood about your little one's vision in terms of what we understand that they can see, and what the concerns are.
Yeah, I think another thing to pick up there, Sarah, is that you've been told your son's got global developmental delay, and just a sort of couple of words about that term, global developmental delay. We try to move beyond that term now, because delay, parents have said, well, I was told my child was delayed, therefore I'm assuming my child is going to catch up. And catch up does sometimes happen, particularly in visual impairment, but it doesn't always happen. So we do try and use the word developmental impairment now, because it's a little bit of a better description. And those terms shouldn't really be used in much older children. Clearly your child is not old, your child is 2. So it's clear that whoever has said that is recognizing that his development is unfolding a bit more slowly. Again, you've been told he's got sensory processing issues. What I hear from that is that there are differences in the way your son is reacting to various sensations. We probably wouldn't call that a sensory processing disorder, but it would make us think, are those sensory differences something that comes from the visual impairment, or could it be an early sign that there are some differences emerging? And there's quite a lot of things that might be helpful to understand in more detail. But as Ellie has said, your first port of call would be to talk about your concerns with your specialist teacher, to get your specialist teacher to link up with your community paediatrician, so that everybody is all talking together and working out what is needed, and whether a specialist assessment will be helpful at this stage or not.
Can I just add to that as a parent? So I was told Scarlett had sensory processing and she was younger, and I found it quite hard to work out where to go and who to talk to. But I always highly recommend a book called The Out of Sync Child. I know it's been around for many years now, but as a parent, it's very digestible, and you do get lots of light bulb moments. So I do have lots of parents who come in and ask about sensory processing. I'm not an occupational therapist, but as a parent, I found that book very helpful. So if you want to do some extra reading, I can send the details of that book out to you as well, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, those sensory differences can be really dominant, can't they? Can be really, really dominant. So, whether we call it sensory processing, sensory differences, but I just wanted to get across earlier that whole collection of sensory differences is very much part of differences that come under autism. So it's kind of a bit academic whether we call it something separate or not. And in some ways that we don't have automatic strategies that we know will help. There are things that you can try, and we often meet parents, I'm sure including many of yourselves, who've tried all sorts of things, and eventually you hit upon the thing that works for your child.
Thank you. It's Sarah, sorry, with the 2-year-old.
Hello, Sarah.
He bangs his head an awful lot. So he'll bang it on really hard surfaces, and he's also now started to hit himself in the face a lot as well. And doesn't like to be told, like if we just say like be careful or no, don't do that, he will literally throw himself backwards or bang his head really hard. We were referred to occupational therapy for that, but that wasn't too helpful, to be honest. They said try putting like a woolly hat on him, but he does actually bruise his head quite badly, so I can't leave him at all. And the problem we have is we've been referred to like the community paediatrician, but there's like a 12 to 18 month wait, so we're still with the hospital one that he's been, when he was born he was seen, and child development centres as well, we're waiting for so
yeah, that's a really tricky one, and I might guess that there are some other parents who've gone through that difficulty as well. And again, you know, we can't give you full clinical advice, but it's like you're walking along a tightrope, isn't it? Because you do not want to see your child bang their head. You do not want to see your child bite themselves. And your instinct as a parent is to say, don't do that, be careful. But by reacting, you are reinforcing that behavior. So you're making it more likely that your child will do that again because you've given them some attention. So the basic advice is not to do anything that draws attention to that behavior, as difficult as that may seem, because as a parent, your instinct is to say no or don't do that. Those behaviors can go. They can go as quickly as they arrive. And if you can follow a fairly strict, I'm not going to reinforce this by reacting, those behaviors can diminish quite quickly. I know it's very easy for me to say that, and that sounds really glib, because it is very, very difficult and upsetting as a parent to see your child do something which seems to be so extreme and painful as bang their head. But if you can walk that tightrope of not reacting, knowing that anything you do or say in response is likely to reinforce that behavior, sometimes it is possible to move forward.
We have tried like not reacting. I've tried all of those, but he's like, he just gets really severe bruises, so I can't, like, I just pick him up now because I can't just leave him doing it. I literally can't do it. We find that really difficult.
Yeah.
I feel like because he's done this since a really young age, it's now, I'm not sure whether it's like a sensory issue or part of autism or something else, and now it's like a learned behaviour, so he's not, that's really difficult because I try to leave him, but he does get really big bruises and I can't leave him doing it. So yeah. No,
that's really, really tricky, Sarah. And, you know, I wish we could go into more detail about that, but it's really difficult in this forum. And it does sound as if some extra support and reassurance for you as parents is certainly needed. And I'm sorry that you've got such long waits. Is your teacher helpful at all?
The QTVI. She is, but she's more on the visual side, not the behavioural side of it. So I think she's a bit lost with that, to be honest. We had physio involved because he didn't sit up until he was 17 months, but he has like caught up with everything. Like he's wobbly walker now, but he has caught up in those ways. Speech and language is under as well now, because he's delayed in that area as well. Like he can copy words, but he doesn't use words in context. Like he's never called me mama or he's never called dad dada, but he will now copy words. But talking now. So yeah, it's just like really unsure area, but because he's still quite young still, it's trying to get the right support really as parents and trying to like nip behaviours in the bud a little bit, but we haven't got that support to do that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's really, really tricky. I'm really sorry to hear that, Sarah.
Thank you for your help anyway.
So next one,
iPhone 4.
Yeah. So your daughter had a very traumatic experience in the eye clinic. That does sound unpleasant. Pediatrician's reluctant to refer to GOSH. She's under the neurodisability team. So is she under a local neurodisability team? I'm not clear from the comment.
So I'm not sure who iPhone 4's name is as well. So do you want to mute yourself? Still
So just to summarise, as I say, we can't take referrals from teachers. We can take referrals from community paediatricians, from ophthalmologists. If a referral comes from an ophthalmologist, we would generally, as I said earlier, want to know a little bit more about who's already involved so that we can all try to work together.
Oh, here we go.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, that was from me. Yeah, it was a very, very awful experience. It was so traumatic. Because she's very sensory. It's very, she's not anywhere clinical. So it was very sort of like in the room. They sat her on a chair, and she will not sit on a chair. She has to be laying down because you can't. It took 3 of us to pin her down to look into her eyes. It was absolutely horrendous. Literally, she was scared, and the ophthalmologist said that she was a very uncooperative child, which I didn't like, because she wasn't being uncooperative. She didn't understand what was going on.
Yeah.
So she wasn't being uncooperative. She just didn't understand that they wanted to look in her eyes, and she couldn't cope with that.
Yeah.
So it was awful, really awful.
Yes. Children only don't cooperate with situations that are not pitched in the right way for them. We have to be very careful how we judge children. So I'm sorry it came across in that way. But I wasn't clear whether...
she's under the... she's got cerebral palsy, so she's under them as well. So she's under the neurodisability with her cerebral palsy.
Right. Oh, well, you can always talk to the is that the movement disorder team?
Yeah,
you can always talk to them about whether, and they could talk to us about whether an additional assessment might help. I mean, it depends what particular questions you've got and how we can play a role with that.
It's just she had they diagnosed her loosely with atrophy, so it was a very sort of loose diagnosis, because also they couldn't really sort of look at her, give her any levels of vision, because she's non-verbal. She can't tell you what she sees, so she's non-verbal. But she sort of says she's got like atrophy of the eye. So her it was white. So instead of being dark, it was white. So the lens was white. So she did say she's got really poor vision, but she's not had an eye test for 7 years. Since she was 3, because she was under Luton and Dunstable, Dr. Barnes, because she was born really premature. She was born at 23 weeks. So she had ROP as well, like retinopathy of prematurity, and she was under Dr. Barnes there. So he diagnosed her with obviously ROP, and he was the last eye doctor that she saw. So this appointment was a bit of a sort of anticlimax, really.
Yeah. And did she have any input from a VI teacher at all?
When she was younger, I mean, she's 12 now. I mean, she's at a specialist school anyway. She's been there since she was 3. She had that habilitation and all things like that, but that sort of seemed to stop. So I am a bit sort of dubious what her vision or her eyes are healthy. I just don't know, because obviously she's non-verbal and she's hard to examine. It's a difficult one, and she's autism. She's got autistic as well. She's autism.
Yeah, I mean, there are some ways of assessing vision without needing an eye test. Obviously, if she had ROP and she does have reduced vision, then one would want to try and figure out how much of that is the ROP. But there are ways of assessing vision other than in the eye clinic, and often vision is not very well assessed in the eye clinic anyway. No. Just I might suggest that the next time you're up seeing the movement disorder team, you just have a bit of a talk with them about what it is you're not really you're feeling that you're lacking, and then see if that leads to any suggestions. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So there's a comment from Philip. Thanks, Philip. And then a question from Loriana. Is there any group that parents can join regarding VI and autism? I don't know of any groups, but I think that groups come together informally through third sector organisations such as VICTA. Perhaps, Charlotte, you've got some other thoughts about that.
So we do have an online support group called the VICTA Parent Network. It isn't specific to VI and autism, it's more of a generic one, but we do get lots of people asking questions in there about that topic. As Philip's also commented, guide dogs. And also, if you can tell me where you're based, I might be able to put you in touch with a more localized group if you're interested in kind of face-to-face type scenario.
Yes, thank you very much for this help. I am very interested. I'm based in Bexley.
Right, you'll have to. My geography is not fabulous, but I've sent you I'm going to email you separately after this session, and we can go into a bit more detail about who you're trying to connect with, and I can speak to kind of local authorities and find out, you know, what they've got on offer in that area. It is quite, that topic is quite specific, just VI.
Yes.
So to get a collection of parents with just that particular interest might be quite difficult, but parents in general, there's lots of organisations that you know, offer support groups, whether or not it's online like this or it's face to face. I know Look UK run workshops like ours, but they also do a discussion one as well once a month, which is more open to any topics. And I know RSBC do similar, an online program as well. I think they covered this topic back in April. So, but I know they just have general meet. How old is
my daughter? She will turn 5 in 4 days.
Okay, yeah, so it's kind of early years-ish. Right. But
yes,
I will we'll chat offline. I'll get a bit more information about where you live and
okay, awesome. Thank you very much.
Not a problem.
So just going on to, there's a question from Saeed and Felicity about your son who's just started reception, and you're really saying he's already receiving support. How will an ASD diagnosis change the support he's getting? Well, hopefully what it will do is allow everybody to get together to discuss who Ernest is, what his strengths and differences are, and how he needs to be supported in the classroom. So it sounds like you're applying for an EHCP, but you need that meeting to discuss that new diagnosis and the support in school in more detail. So hopefully an ASD diagnosis helps people to understand why children are as they are. That should also focus people's minds on where does he need the support and how are we going to actually give that support. And you know, many schools are really good at problem solving and really good at saying, you know, this is the area that Ernest is excelling in, this is the area where he needs support, let's roll up our shirt sleeves and figure out how we're going to put that into place. So it sounds like a meeting to discuss that is the next step, and perhaps the EHCP might also, if you're awarded one, go into a bit more detail about the areas in which he needs support and suitable support strategies for him.
I think Danielle has asked a question that I think is a theme we've tried to touch on, so it's maybe something that's worth reiterating a bit, that it mislabeling because of VI. Is VI behaviour not just that instead of autism? How many times do you do an ADOS test on a VI child and say they are not autistic? Yeah, that's a big question and a tricky one, and I don't think we've got data at the tips of our fingers about how often we say we don't have evidence to show that at this point a child's following an autistic profile of development. But we absolutely, I mean, all the time we're thinking, we're analysing a behaviour or a communication style and trying to break down what could be informing it, and that's why we're using these. And also, an ADOS isn't the way that we would be using it. It wouldn't be sort of a pass-fail test. It's being sort of validated at the moment to try and have scores that we could reliably use as thresholds to consider a diagnosis of autism. And that's how it's used for sighted children too. There may be children who score above threshold or who the test shows it would be supportive of an autistic profile of development. But however, because of how that child's performing in their daily life, how they are perceived as being impaired or not in their school performance, in their performance with their peers, they may not actually be someone who we should be considering as following an autistic profile. So we would always take a very 360 approach. And you're right, it's a risk. It's a risk of mislabeling.
Because, for example, that page you had where you were saying, and I would imagine it's what you would classify under the social communication type differences, if they don't make eye contact because they're face blind, or they're not picking up on those visual cues and therefore not necessarily reading the intent behind what someone said. How do you not label that as a social communication development delay or difference or whatever, because it's related to the visual impairment? Because this is a process my daughter's currently going through, and I firmly believe that all of her issues are attributable to her visual impairment. But from my understanding of what you said earlier, those behavioral differences in your world of autism mean that's autism. So effectively what you're saying is everyone who has these differences of understanding and processing, or even reacting to how social norms dictate, that means her label will be autistic. But from my perspective, all of those differences and difficulties that she has relate to her visual impairment. So I would be very curious to know, statistically, now we've been sent down that road, how many people you assess with a visual impairment that you do not classify as autistic.
The answer to that, Daniela, is some. So not everybody with visual impairment is autistic. I recently heard Catherine Lord speak. Catherine Lord is a renowned academic who developed the ADOS, and she was doing some fairly deep reflecting on the difficulties in some scenarios of exactly that, deciding what is and what isn't, and reflecting that it's much more difficult to distinguish is or isn't when there is associated significant learning challenges as well. But if this puts your mind at rest, what we can say is that if we are doing an assessment which is adapted from the ADOS, then we are not including activities, for example, that score or observe eye contact or facial expression, because if you can't make eye contact because you can't see a face, then you can't be judged on your inability to make eye contact, because that is a consequence of your not being able to see. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you. But then again, this boils down to your list of what you consider a severe visual impairment. For example, I would imagine the bulk of issues would be ocular, whereas with my daughter, it's not ocular at all. She has CVI. So, it's all her perceptual vision and things like speed and things like that. So I'll be honest, extremely concerned that she will be mislabeled with autism when she isn't. Well, I'm not saying she is, but that my concern is the mislabeling.
Sure. And what we also know in child development, young person development, is that there's a lot of what we might call fluidity. There's a lot of overlap. You could have elements of cerebral visual impairment and elements of autism. You could have both of those conditions. It's not an either or. There is a risk that if a young person's visual difficulties are not fully understood, that there could be a misattribution of a difficulty to the wrong reason. But autism is not just about eye contact. Autism is not just about facial recognition. It's not just about facial expression. So a thorough assessment considering any young person's strengths and differences won't or shouldn't just be concentrating on the visually mediated aspects of that. It's also got to think about, take vision out of it. It's also got to take into account a person's interests, their ability to be flexible in conversation, to take another person's perspective. And many of those things don't depend on vision. So I hear your caution and your concern. The other thing about autism is that there isn't a single thing that rules it in, and there isn't a single thing that rules it out. So people with autism and normal vision do and can make eye contact. So it's not that people with autism never make eye contact. It's not that people with autism don't have friends. There are no absolutes. It's about the subtleties, and it's about the combination of all those things, and who is the person underneath. So no child should be overdiagnosed and misdiagnosed with autism if judged on the basis of visual behaviours that are in themselves difficult for that person. And there's a whole heap of other things that would need to be considered as well. So I hope that's of some reassurance, but I hear your caution.
Thank you. No, it's been a great call. Thank you.
I know we're coming to the end. We do have one hand up in the chat. Victoria, I know I'm just looking here, and I think maybe you've been kicked out and rejoined again, or maybe you've accidentally put your hand up. Victoria Delve, if we've got two Victorias, sorry, I didn't double check that. Oh, I think she may have left. Yeah, she joined and she's left again. I
might have to call it an evening there, if that's okay, Charlotte and everybody. But it's such a pleasure, really is. And I think when we try and think about the questions you ask us, it makes us better and better able to serve you when we do meet in clinic and when we come across these questions. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much to both of you for joining us this evening. We appreciate how super busy you must be. I would have loved a session like this back when my girl was little. So we appreciate you giving up the time and joining us tonight. And I hope that lots of the parents have got answers to questions or understand something a little bit more clearly or feel a bit more informed. So I'll let you guys log off. And then I'll look to the parents. Thank you very much, and good
Lovely to meet you all.
Thank you.
Take care. All the best.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found it useful. As I said, I've been where you are before, so I do understand. So, as I said at the start, we do have 30 minutes remaining. So if anyone wants to stay on and continue commenting, or do you want to have a chat amongst yourself, or you want to ask me any questions about my daughter and my experiences, then feel free. I know we've got a few people have already left. It's quite a lot of information, isn't it, to take in 90 minutes. This was like the second time we've run it this year, and we had two different doctors the first time we did it, and it was a completely different presentation. So I think just the scope for the topic is so huge. I think one comment I'd like to make in terms of schooling and whatever your child accesses, whether or not that's mainstream or specialist, I've been quite lucky that the setting that Scarlett's in is very tailor-made to each of the students. So her progress has been really good. And I think, a big reason behind that is because it's not a one model fits all. I did worry a lot in the early days that a lot of the autism learning is done through visual signals. And I thought, how are they going to get around things like that? But we've got a brilliant setting, and it's made a huge difference to Scarlett's progress. So that was like a positive that I wanted to add there. Loriana, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I just have one quick question. I know the whole situation is very complex, But my question is about one behavior my daughter has. She usually tends to respond the opposite of what we say to her. For example, in situations where there are danger, for example, don't go there or you get burned. I want to get burned, and then she does it and get burned. But not only once, because we may think, no, she's just trying to understand what burned is. No, she keep doing it several times in the same situation, which is a little bit strange. And for example, if we are walking somewhere, please stop, don't go there. There is a hole, there is something that may hurt you. Then she goes straight for it, looking for it, chasing it. And I said here as well, if we want to have a picture with a smile, we must do the command, don't smile, please. Then we got the smile. I just wondering if anyone has the same situation, or is it something that is common or known by the specialists, or is something really new for everyone?
I can tell my daughter no a million times, but because of her sensory needs, that overrides completely my instruction. So I mentioned at the beginning, banging on the radiator. The banging on the radiator went on for about 2 years, and it wasn't soft, and it was hard. And the more we told her no, the more she did it. And I was worrying, thinking, is it a behavioural thing? And it was only until somebody brought up sensory processing disorder, and I looked a little bit more into that, and we had occupational therapist intervention. She's a sensory seeker, so she's banging to make the noise and to get the feel. It's like when we feel hungry, that's a sensation we feel in our body. So it could be she's trying to seek that. It's like, say something itches and you can't help but scratch it. So it's really hard to decide whether or not it's a behavioural thing or a sensory thing. Has anyone spoke to you about sensory processing disorder, or have you come across any occupational therapists or anything in your...
Yeah, no, actually, since she was born, I noticed some aspects that concerned me about, for example, holding things all the time and holding things very, very firmly. I could see the circulation, I mean, the fingers getting white with no circulation. She always used to hold things very tidy, and she always hold things, no matter what is this, a book or something. But not just this, lots of other aspects. But we are always in the same situation. Is it because of the VI situation? Is it because she has something else? We never know. And all the specialists we asked for help, only one, the speech and language therapist, she noticed something. She was the only one that said that maybe she has some traces of autism, but we don't have any diagnosis, or we don't have anything to work with until now, because she's only 4, and we are just assisting her and trying to see how it goes. And yeah, no diagnosis, nothing at the moment.
Are you under a pediatrician?
Not yet, because
that will help. As soon as you get under the pediatrician,
pediatrician will be the person.
Yeah, I would like referral to an occupational therapist. I would also like you to look at some of the behavioural things. Some are great and refer you straight away and put you under the right team. Others you have to push a little bit. Obviously she's still quite young, your daughter, so it'll be hard. But you know now, and you've listened to these discussions and engage with them. So when you're talking to them, you'll be able to build your case a bit stronger. I think it's quite hard for them to watch your child for an hour and go, oh yeah, we're going to make a referral. But if the parent can go in with lots of knowledge and say, this is why we've got these concerns, this is the information you found out, it will help you to get those referrals quicker, because they're not always very quick, unfortunately. So, sorry, Sarah, you've got your hand up. Did you want to speak to Loriana, or?
No, it was something separate.
Oh, something separate. But yeah, definitely. ask for occupational therapists. That gripping. We did do a session earlier in the year with about sensory processing disorder, and so many parents were like, I can't believe, like, so for an example, my daughter is a seeker, so she doesn't sleep very well. So we have to do kind of sensory massage, wrapping around in a piece of lycra, you know, all these kind of activities we have to do as part of a program before she goes to sleep to help her to go to sleep. And this is something I've only picked up quite recently. We use ear defenders sometimes out in public, but you could ask for an occupational therapist, and I'm certain that you'll get some answers. I know how frustrating it is as well. I've been there, so I do understand.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Thank you very much. I'll try and do it, definitely. Thank you.
Would it be okay to say something to Laureana before we start something else? I don't know, Sarah, you had your hand up. Is that rude or is that okay?
No, it's fine.
No, go for it.
So I was like, when I listened to you, it made me feel like there's something that I recognize in my son, who is about to be 11. And so he is visually impaired. He had congenital cataracts, and he has a diagnosis in dyspraxia. That he's autistic and dyspraxic. But there's something in his behavior that is sort of demand avoidant, maybe you could call it. So, you know, obviously I can only talk from my experience. And so, but there was something in there that I recognized when we ask him something, that he gets maybe quite like, the arousal in his nervous system is so high as a result of the demand that he will definitely not do it. So there's something of that. So your daughter is so incredibly young still.
Yeah.
And yet you have got a hunch about something where, you know, if you ask her to do something, he would or not to do something, she would do the opposite. There is such a thing, right?
Yeah, it's dangerous. It's dangerous because sometimes I'm afraid about a real dangerous situation where we should give the right command, don't go. And what should I say? Go? For her to don't go? It's tricky because, yeah, it's concerning. Yeah, I don't know what to do.
Yeah. That's all I had on that one.
Sorry?
That's all I had on that one. I would be great to talk more, but I think that.
Thank you very much for sharing this with me. I appreciate. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What?
Sarah?
Yeah, I was just my son's nice diagnosis in albinism, and we're kind of going through the neurodiverse kind of assessments at the moment. It's such a multi-agency thing. We've got like a QBTI. The GP doesn't really seem interested actually in the slightest, and we've got healthcare. If you were to kind of get everybody together to kind of discuss it as a team, because there's so many agencies involved, and you feel like you're having to go to different people and kind of address concerns, and some will take them, you know, the GP isn't interested at the moment.
Yeah, and then this is very much just my opinion, but I have a social worker, and we've had one for a long time, from the Children's with Disabilities team. When I was trying to get everyone together to have a meeting, it was impossible to get people to coordinate the diaries. But when we got referred to that social worker, people tended to listen to her a little bit more. And this is from my daughter was 18 months old when we had the first multi-agency meeting, and it made a huge difference. And I know I can't imagine GPs taking that role of trying to coordinate you know, a multi-team meeting. I don't know if you have something similar like a key worker.
Yeah, we've got like, if at nursery, I've got my QBTI. I mean, she's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And because I'm in Hampshire, and Portsmouth Council they don't go through CAMS. They've got a completely different neurodiverse paneling tool. And I think they do paneling across the whole of the council, and I think they do pull in, but I feel like you're just having to go to different people a lot.
Yeah, I completely understand. I think my educational psychologist report was a big game changer in terms of it getting addressed in the EHCP. Have you been able to get one of them yet, Sarah?
We've just started applying because he's due to start school in September, and I think, and as I said to nursery, I think we're going to really struggle him actually just starting the school because of his behaviour and sensory, you know, issues with clothing and anxiety. He's quite an anxious child, so yeah, I don't know. But we've just put it in this month, so I don't know if we'll get it or not.
Yeah, I think, if you can get an educational psychologist report, that's a really good first start. Have you started seeking an EHCP? Yeah, is this part of this, or are you?
Yeah, we've submitted it. We've submitted it literally this week.
Okay. Well, good luck.
Thanks.
But yeah, when they're quite young, it does take time to fall into place. I remember being really, really frustrated when Scarlett was young, and everything's in place now and works really well. And I know I'm one of the very fortunate parents that has happened to, and the setting has played a big part in it. I just think it's horrible having to wait, but sometimes it's just the length of all processes. But yeah, sorry, I wish I could be more help, Sarah, than just saying you've gone in there.
Yeah, no, it's been a really useful session and listening to people's, you know, experiences and their kind of their stories.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks for that. So we've got 2 people with hands up. Jen, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you. I was just gonna add to some of the previous conversation, just to say that on our journey with my little boy, oh, he's so wonderful. He's so great, and he's doing really, really well. He's 7 and he's got quite a lot of language, and but he does have some social communication difficulties, and as part of that, I had some support with speech and language therapist. I've got a mentor, and she helps me like basically help him. And she came across the idea that he had some sensory issues as well. And that was like a complete light bulb moment for me as well. And then I was looking for an occupational therapist. And even though one of my best friends is a speech and language therapist, she was like, Jen, I cannot get an occupational therapist for love or money. I can't get one for the like 10-year-olds who spend all day streaming. You just won't get one. Like, good luck with that. But seriously, you won't do it. And she was like, but I've had loads of training on this, and I can walk you through the sensory integration process. So I was like, boom, this is amazing. And what she gave me was some of the information that one of the doctors was talking about earlier. She was saying that there is like a sort of profile for children. So it's like she talked about like the tick list of like going through basically like the different areas that a child might be like sensory seeking in or sensory avoiding in, and then it's basically like a tick sheet, and then you find out whether your child is particularly sensory seeking in like sort of vestibular, like the movement sense, or whether they're like looking more for like a touch or a taste, like it's kind of the smell and the taste are quite combined actually. It's kind of like oral stimulation that, you know, like with chewies and all of that, but basically you kind of find out with this tick list what kind of things your child is looking for, and then with that I was able to put together sort of some lists about some activities that my child would benefit from. And like the idea is to do 2 hours a day, and I've like never done 2 hours a day, but it's really great to like have that in my mind. And he honestly, like, he's really thriving on it. It's really good. And as I've got all of this information, I was just going to say that I'll put my like email in the chat, and if it's useful for anybody else, then I can just email anybody who wants that and kind of talk them through it.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, I agree. When the sensory stuff was like, oh, I can't believe I didn't know. Why hasn't anyone told me this information until now? Scarlett has quite a significant sensory plan. I'm just going to share a link for anyone who's a bit more interested in finding more information about sensory. That plan that you've just described, I've shared Scarlett's one. It's a number of years old, but it talks about seeker or avoider. And when you determine them, a lot of behaviours do change as a result. I was very much, I just think Scarlett's autistic, and then when the sensory stuff come into play, I was like, so. But yeah, thanks for that, Jen. If you want to, yeah. Victoria, I'm not sure if Victoria's on the call or I think she must be in the screens.
Hi, it's me.
Oh, hello. Sorry, you did have your hand up earlier, but I think you may have got kicked out of the chat whilst the doctors were still there, unfortunately.
No, it was I was trying to find the unmute button and I couldn't find it anywhere, but I found it now. So yeah, the question was, I found it like really, really, really hard to like get an autism diagnosis. Like been trying for about 5 years now, and it's just hopeless. So yeah, I mean, I'm still on this silly waiting list thing. So I don't know if there's anything I can be doing in the meantime, or anybody got anything to suggest? Because each time, because he was at Gosh since he was like 2 months old, and each time I've mentioned it to someone, they've said, "Oh, he's at Gosh," like, "Oh, they'll do it there," but they never have. So like, oh.
Have you asked them to refer to the neurodevelopment clinic?
Well, no, because he's 17 now, he's been discharged.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I do remember your comments from earlier on. Yeah, yeah.
So while I'm still waiting, I must be near the top now. I don't know if there's like anything I could be doing in the meantime while I'm waiting, or if I just got to keep waiting. Thanks.
I would say it's a case of keep waiting. I think we've all, as parents, have probably done this similar waiting game throughout our children's lives. Has anyone else got any? Sorry, what area did you say you were in again, Victoria? Is it
Hertfordshire?
Hertfordshire. I don't know that postcode. I've not got much information, but has anyone a bit more local got any suggestions?
So we are in London. We went private because we didn't want to wait.
How much did that cost you, if I don't mind me asking?
No, I don't mind you asking. It was 2,000 and
oh my God,
£300 or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So that cost us our holiday.
Yeah.
And it was life-changing for my son. He was only 10, and since then he's now almost 11. It really changed how he talks about himself and what he thinks he can ask for in home life.
Okay. Might be worth
I'm from Hertfordshire. But Anais was diagnosed at Gosh. So I'm not sure. I mean, I know the waiting list is really high in Hertfordshire. It's not a great county to live in if you've got SEN, to be honest. It's the worst county to live in if you've got SEN. It's absolutely horrendous.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's just, they don't, there's been, I mean, Hertfordshire have just had their sort of like check on their progress, and they've just had the worst like sort of Ofsted thing, really bad. Really bad Ofsted, and it's not great. So yeah, it's not great. So regards of waiting, like you say, it's just a case of waiting. It's just it's awful. It's not right. It's not right at all. It's absolutely horrendous. You shouldn't have to wait that long. But the way it is at the moment, it's just awful. It's really awful.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Good luck anyway.
Yeah, good
and you.
Thanks. No problem.
Anybody else got anything so we're getting to 8 now. Has anybody else got anything they'd like to share, or anything they would like to ask before finish for tonight? Thank you for being such interactive parents. Fabulous. So as I said, you'd all receive a recording. If Jenefer or Ellie send anything supporting through, I'll also forward that across. sorry, I'm not gone silent or frozen. I'm just checking, but it just does it in one long string of names. So yeah, I'll be doing a follow-up email after this session, including the recording, and I'll also send you a feedback form that I'd really appreciate if you could just tick a few boxes for me. It's just really useful for me to shape for future sessions. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope it's been a useful session. And then you can obviously contact me at any, as a parent support worker, you can contact me at any time. And if I don't have the right answers, I can hopefully signpost you to the right people. So yeah, I think that's good night for everyone. And thank you very much for joining us.